I'd like now to introduce our next speaker, supporting those who serve the Royal Foundation of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, David Wiseman. David served with the British Army in Iraq and Afghanistan, but was medically discharged after receiving a wound to the chest. Since then, he has overseen the development of the Endeavour Fund, Step into Employment, and was a founding member of the executive team that brought the Invictus Games from concept to delivery in 2013-14. David has competed in 3 Invictus Games and captained the UK team in 2016. In 2017, David co-founded the CaseVac Club, supporting recovery to inspire and achieve growth. Please welcome David Wiseman.
So John and Josh, very hard acts to follow just before lunch. And I'd just like to state that I applaud their approaches and certainly support their ambitions. For a long time, and perhaps even still now, PTSD was the shortcut, the catch-all term for somebody with a forces background experiencing poor mental health. And for some members of society, it's almost become an expectation that somebody experiencing combat will certainly develop a serious psychological disorder. Many veterans I speak to still talk about the post-traumatic stress in which they suffer as a result of trauma experienced many years previously. And in a lot of cases, I'm sure that that disorder is resistant to treatment. But I do think that perception of a lifelong condition is reinforced by the messages these guys receive through the media, and perhaps even from those who are there to support them in their recovery and life after injury. I would like us to challenge the perception that a diagnosis of PTSD is a life sentence. Without swinging the lamp too much, I can only speak from my own experiences. While serving in Afghanistan in November 2009, I was the first responder to the Green on Blue incident at Blue 25, the police station in Shinkalay, on the 3rd of November 2009, a decade ago, just last Sunday. Upon arrival, 3 British soldiers were already dead. 1 was soon to pass, and another died on the helicopter. A further 9 Brits and 1 Afghan had received gunshot wounds, many of which were multiple, including 1 guardsman that had been shot 7 times, mainly through the upper legs, but also 1 through both forearms and 1 in the eye. We also had 3 soldiers with battle shock, 1 of whom was wandering around the compound in his underwear, stepping over his fallen comrades, asking for the exit. As an OMLT commander, I only had 7 men to deal with the situation and the Taliban assaults that followed. We fought them off until 9 o'clock that evening. We were reinforced, of course, but for a period of time, the only people dealing with the situation, with the casualties on the ground, were just myself and my young Ghanaian RAMC medic, for whom this was only his 2nd ever patrol in the British Army. This was 2009, a very busy period for us in Helmand. In a particularly stressful month, my small team of Brits, embedded within the Afghan National Army, dealt with 25 casualties. Not including this incident at the police station, this included gunshot wounds to the head, a traumatic amputation, and even a severely burnt toddler. We would spend up to 20 days on the ground at a time, away from camp, and commandeering buildings, sometimes literally throwing families out of their homes in order that we could establish somewhere safe for us to live for a few days. 2 weeks after the incident at the police station, I would become the 26th casualty my young Ghanaian medic would have to deal with. He kept me alive for long enough to allow a US helicopter to pick me up after I received a gunshot wound to the chest during an advance to contact just north of Fob Shawkat. The round entered my body just below my clavicle, and because I was prone to the ground, travelled the length of my torso, hit my back ribs, rattled the front, hit my front ribs, and then came to rest in my lung, where it resides today. So when I was listening to one of the talks yesterday, and they had that list of sort of the danger factors for post-traumatic stress, handling dead, being wounded, moral injury, living in austere and dangerous environments, risk of life, dealing with others who are injured, I thought, yeah, I can tick off a few of those. So it's probably not a shock that I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2012. And for many years, this meant all the usual things people talk about: avoidance, risk-taking, hypervigilance, flashbacks. Experiences differ, of course, but for me, living with PTSD meant having to constantly have a busy mind, because a relaxed mind was one that filled automatically with things that you don't want to think about. It meant being tired all of the time. who knew that it took that amount of energy just to think? Thinking can be pretty exhausting, especially for an infantryman. The moments when I couldn't control my thoughts filled me with dread and became the worst times of day, waking up and going to sleep. It meant that I had to be so exhausted that I passed out instead of falling asleep, often with a book over my face or dulled completely with alcohol. Mental exercises helped, making lists as I dropped off, but PTSD is a wicked and mischievous creature. It wants to be thought about and wants to be talked about, so these exercises only worked for so long, and you could almost hear that creature laughing as I tried in vain to complete a list, or someone I wasn't expecting was sitting in my safe place. For me, it meant that even when I wasn't thinking about it, an incident would be playing on a loop somewhere in my mind, and I'd find myself having a chat with someone who all of a sudden started looking at me strangely, and I'd realised that whatever mundane subject we were originally talking about had lurched to some tale of horror that had cleverly crept its way forward and into the conversation. For me, it was living in fear and embarrassment, having to explain that I had to sleep with a light on when I shared a room with a mate, because when I woke, I immediately needed to see where I was and immediately ground. Dissociation was a common occurrence. My brain used to slam itself into neutral as the rest of the world continued to stream past, feeling numb, heavy, unable to move, talk, or interact as the kids ran around bouncing off the furniture with their noisy toys or whatever had overstimulated my mind to the point of it flipping the fuse box. I genuinely felt haunted. I felt a presence behind me whenever I was trying to fall asleep in a noisy room or in a dark car, whenever I was washing my face and my eyes were full of soap. These times would often turn into moments of genuine terror and panic. I still experience the symptoms of trauma, and I have to look after myself, taking a proactive approach to managing my health. I have bad days, bad weeks even, and I get more badly affected by things like stress and emotional regulation. But I am no longer affected every minute of every day. I don't feel like I'm constantly fighting a foe, and these experiences that I've just described are no longer a daily occurrence. I no longer have a gunshot wound either, by the way. Of course, my chest still hurts every now and again, and I have nerve issues into my hand, and I get more lung infections than I used to, but I don't have a gunshot wound. Much in the same way, I'm still affected by those experiences in Afghanistan, but I don't count myself as living with a debilitating psychological disorder. We rarely hear about those successes, those recoveries. And at no point in my recovery was I told that this was something that I'd get over. In fact, quite the opposite. I was told that this would remain something that I would have to deal with and manage for my whole life. So let's change the conversation about this issue and change the words that we use. Instead of talking about suffering from the scars of war, we always hear the word suffering connected with mental health for some reason. Let's consider using terms such as learning to process difficult experiences or progressing through the effects of trauma. And let's always talk about a positive end state of recovery and growth, not the expectation of a diminished version of self. Just as Nicola demonstrated yesterday with her approach to statistics, what if we try to always look at life post-trauma through a lens with a bias towards positivity? Some people might pass this off as semantics, but a lot of the impact of trauma comes with the perception of that trauma and what it means to the individual in question. And when dealing with such, words become important. This is not an attempt to downplay those for whom treatment has not been successful, but rather an attempt to change perceptions and adopt a positive stance for those whom such an approach would prove beneficial for their recovery. Because positive thinking is a powerful tool in anyone's arsenal when they're recovering from any sort of injury. Through my involvement with the Endeavour Fund and the Invictus Games, I've seen time and again how individuals with a positive mindset can achieve great things when the odds are stacked against them. I've been asked here to talk a bit about post-traumatic growth and share some of my experiences as an example, but of course this is terribly embarrassing, and so I have to caveat by first saying that I'm surrounded by people in my community who have sometimes equaled, but more often excelled my own achievements post-injury. I'll tell you a bit more about them in a bit, but to blow my own trumpet purely as a demonstration of post-traumatic growth, here goes. I was wounded 15th of November 2009, pretty much 10 years ago. And as soon as I could get my body moving again, I pushed to regain fitness, and then tried my hand at mountaineering, reaching the summit of the 8th highest mountain in the world and having a crack at Everest just 2 years after nearly dying in an Afghan ditch. I've written a book about that recovery journey, which I know Mark is reading right now, and as he will tell you, it's grippingly mediocre, edging to the entertainingly fair. In my professional life, I've helped to start or develop a series of different programs, initiatives, and charities, from the Endeavour Fund, Step Into Health, and HeadFit, becoming a trusted advisor to Prince Harry in the process. I helped to steal 2 great ideas from the US and establish them back in the UK. The first was Team Rubicon, an organization that uses the skills and the experiences of veterans and first responders in times of natural disaster, and with whom I've deployed on 4 occasions to disaster zones around the world. And the second was the Invictus Games. I was part of the executive committee that took it from initial concept to delivery of the first games in 2014. But not content with working behind the scenes, I also competed in 3 Invictus Games, bringing home 14 medals, and had the honor of being the national captain in 2016. I was awarded the Winfield Scholarship by the US State Department and was involved in their overseas leadership program. I sit on a number of boards and committees and have recently co-founded the CASIVAC Club. It looks like CASEVAC, but it's CASIVAC. So quite a lot to pack into the last 10 years, whilst also going through transition out of the military, having 2 kids, and somehow keeping hold of a beautiful wife. I'd like to spend a bit more time, if I may, on the CASIVAC Club. CASIVAC is a military term meaning casualty evacuation. The club's members have to be nominated by an existing member, and they are eligible if they have been wounded in combat in Iraq or Afghanistan to such a degree that they were CASIVAC'd from the battlefield and then medevac'd home from theatre. Our 3 objectives are to establish and maintain a community of those who share the experiences of combat, wounding, and recovery, reinforced by the fact that we have members in key positions on influential boards and committees that are able to advocate the needs of this group and their families. Secondly, we wish to use our experiences and profile to promote a pro-social agenda, that service that John was talking about previously, helping others deal with their trauma and to raise funds for worthy causes. Over the past 2 years, we have raised over £20,000 for Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital, and we have worked with young people affected by the Manchester Arena bombing and 2 children in the run-up to and the aftermath of amputation as a result of bone cancer. And thirdly, we wish to use the experience that we have in our own conditions and the expertise in our own conditions to advance medical science, noting the fact that we're a group of several hundred, mainly men, all roughly the same age, similar mechanisms of injury, either IED or gunshot wound, exactly the same post-injury treatment, and the recovery pathway, and otherwise fit and well. In short, arguably, we're an absolutely mega research cohort. We work in partnership with the Scar-Free Foundation and supported the establishment of the Centre for Conflict Wound Research in Birmingham last year. Now, we realise on the surface that this looks terribly altruistic, but trust me, we're not actually that nice. We realise that by sticking together, by helping others, and by promoting advancement in medical science, we're really helping ourselves. The reason I focused on the CASIVAC Club is because I believe it is a hotbed for promoting post-traumatic growth and for helping to sustain it within a supportive environment. The membership currently stands at around about 200. We think we'll top out at about 650. It includes several authors, a critically acclaimed artist, several successful entrepreneurs, 3 national-level sportsmen, including 2 Paralympic medalists, adventurers, including one who is just about to complete the International Grand Slam. That's the highest peak on each continent and both poles. It contains 3 ocean rowers, a television presenter, multiple record holders, an ultramarathon runner, and a government advisor. So it's a fairly punchy group. Post-traumatic growth on steroids. All of us carry wounds from Iraq and Afghanistan, and none of us would describe ourselves as heroes. In fact, all of us say we were pretty average soldiers. After all, if I'd been a better infantryman, I probably wouldn't have been shot. So what has driven us all to achieve post-traumatic growth? I'm not entirely sure, but I can tell you that normal life just doesn't feel right for us. Having been close to death, having experienced the extremes, normal life sometimes just doesn't compute. As an example, a few weeks back, I was sitting in Costa Coffee in Kensington, and remarking with two other members of the club, and all of us remarked that we just didn't feel connected with what was going on. People were coming in, buying coffee, sitting on their laptops in a completely sterile environment with no understanding of what the real world is like, or more accurately, what our perception of the real world is like. And we do realize that it's our perception. Even though our time in Afghanistan was extremely brief, that time felt the most real and certainly the most significant periods of our lives. So perhaps when normality doesn't cut it, we all strive to avoid it. Perhaps when extremes feel more real, we will aim for them. I also think there is a requirement for redefinition stemming from a crisis of identity post-injury, and this is something John mentioned. When I served, I was utterly confident in who I was. I was an infantry officer. This wasn't something I did as a job. It was who I was as a person. And after I was wounded, I thought about myself in both a negative and rearward fashion. A wounded infantryman, a broken soldier. I used to serve. Achieving in sport and later in work gave me something in the present upon which I could begin to redefine my sense of self. These other individuals I mentioned, TV presenters, ocean rowers, and artists, perhaps they're all similarly striving to find that definition of which they are proud and which stands up to their previous profession in terms of status in their own minds. Is there a downside to post-traumatic growth? I believe there could be. Speaking from my own experience, it has sometimes felt like riding the tiger and being unable to let go. Or perhaps to use another analogy, I can see other people acting like Icarus, flying too high and too close to the sun without fully understanding the situation they find themselves in and thus risking a heavy fall. I see it on social media, where some of my friends and acquaintances within the community simply have to portray a positive outlook every day because they have been built up as inspirational heroes that have overcome adversity. And how can they ever have a bad day? They can't, or at least they can't show it. And speaking as a true Englishman, having a good whinge and a moan is an important part of life in order to let off steam. If you're a Superman, you don't have permission to whinge. And so I worry that the pressure continues to build for some of these guys. Charities have played a key role in supporting a lot of this growth. Personally, if it wasn't for Walking with the Wounded, I'd have never had that adventurous experience that went on to both catalyse my rehabilitation and provide me with the ideas and the credibility that fueled the Endeavour Fund from which sprang Invictus. A similar story could be written for others, with different charities playing the lead role. Organisations have provided that support when it was really needed. But all of us who work in charity or in the media must carry some responsibility for creating the veteran hero victim that exists in the minds of society. Lord Ashcroft's report in its recent review shows that most people in the UK believe that most veterans are in some way damaged by their service, physically or psychologically. Charities need to show need, and to do so, they must tell stories that captivate potential donors. I'm not stating this in a cynical way, by the way, it's a fact. And emotive stories are the most effective, and therefore the damaged veteran who overcomes adversity as a result of charity's intervention is an effective method for fundraising. However, in telling these stories, in raising awareness, have we created a problem? Have we fueled the perceptions demonstrated in the Ashcroft report? Have we created a system of dependence? I don't know, but it's something worth thinking about. The Kazivat Club is not a charity. It's a private club where people are nominated to join by its existing members as long as they meet the criteria. Because it's not a charity, there is zero pity, victimhood is not abided, and there is zero requirement for fundraising. So the only stories being told are the bad wardits at the bar. Because it is a community project set up by, of, and for a small cross-section of the veteran population, it is an incredibly tight-knit feel, and therefore informal mutual support can be exchanged through a wide and formal friendship group. Where more support is required, this tight-knit community is able to share information quickly and effectively. Who needs what, and where can they go to get the best support? This community grassroots approach is empowering, dignified, and fulfilling. It doesn't encourage dependence, but rather respects independence and enthusiastically promotes interdependence. It's not the answer, but it could be a piece of the puzzle. And I'd be happy to work with veterans in Australia to set up a brother chapter down under. So to sum up, PTSD isn't a life sentence, and we should be careful with the language we use when we discuss people living with mental health challenges. I urge my friends across the sector to think how charity works. As amazing as it is, we should be moving people out of the system, never holding them in, and never treating them as a resource or a commodity that belongs to that brand. I would also like to advocate models that support grassroots and community level informal peer support. If we can encourage the veteran to take responsibility and ownership of their future, it's possible that they will become invested and more likely to experience true growth, growth that has been earned, not given. I hope that I've portrayed the fact that my story of post-traumatic growth is not the exception, but rather there are many of us who strive for and succeed to grow after experiencing trauma. I would urge my friends and colleagues in the room to always try and look for the positive end state, because if we're not careful, we may create conditions and set perceptions that inhibit growth that benefits the individual, their families, and society as a whole. Instead, let's work to help our people from developing an inflexible identity that ties them to a moment in time and ties them to a psychological injury that could come to define them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. An inspiring story. Thank you for sharing your story of PTSD and your story of post-traumatic growth.